practices and offerings. This is one of the ones where I kind of went off script and I got confused, and I ended up skipping a few things that I wanted to emphasize. So I'll go over that at the end. For now, let's get into the talk.
So let's talk practices. And this picture here is one of the ones that I was talking about where we used a piece of cloth to veil the statue. We used a green piece of cloth because that is a statue of Osiris or Osir. So there are two paths within Kemetic religion that I have identified. There is the priestly path and there is the layperson path. And neither one is better or closer to the netjeru than the other. Priesthood is a very specific role. Everyone serves the gods in the Kemetic community. Everyone is close to the gods in the Kemetic community. But priests very specifically serve the gods through ritual. So they do ritual daily. And they perform ritual on the behalf of their local community. And they perform a very specific kind of ritual. That is the type of ritual that I'm going to be doing later on today, that has specific goals and Heka, which reestablishes Ma'at and kind of draws the netjeru into a relationship with the local community. So ritual purity is a very important concept for them, since they are doing these intensive rituals with lots of Heka, and they're doing it daily. The purpose of priestly ritual is, as I said, to reestablish Ma'at, to ensure the continuation of the cycle of giving between deity and humans, and to draw the deity into a closer relationship with the community. And because they're often maintaining open statues, that's why they need to do the ritual daily, because open statues are living things, and as any living thing, it needs care daily. So if you feel called to be a priest, I would say don't rush into it. Give it at least a year with a statue that is not opened. Do not, I can't stress this enough, do not open a statue casually. But take a statue that is not opened and treat it as if it were open for a year. Do ritual every day. And if at the end of that year you aren't tearing your hair out and wondering why you did this to yourself, then you're ready to open that statue and devote yourself as a priest. So for the layperson, they serve a deity and a local community, but they do it, and they might do it in many different ways, and ritual might be one of them. I am not a priest, but I like priestly ritual, so I do it. But my statues are not open, so I do not necessarily have to do them daily. Ritual purity is important, but it's not as important depending on the type of ritual that you're doing. So there can be kind of varying degrees of need for ritual purity. If you're doing priestly ritual, you should definitely observe purity taboos. If you are just praying, you can pray anywhere in any state, and you don't have to worry about purity at all. The purpose of a layperson's ritual is to develop a personal relationship with the deity, and it can take many forms. So just as we don't have information on domestic altars, we don't have a lot of information on domestic practices either. So because we don't know what the non-priestly caste did very much, there's a lot more room for your personal take. So lay people might practice temple ritual if they wanted to, but it's not required. And ritual itself can be as important or unimportant as you desire. There are so many ways to connect with the netjeru. And I recommend very strongly that you find at least two that work for you. I enrolled in a priesthood training program at one time, and I learned ritual as my primary and honestly only way of interacting with netjeru. And then I reached a point where, for health reasons, I had to stop doing ritual for a while. And I faced a spiritual crisis because I felt completely cut off. I did not know I didn't know if I would ever feel the presence of the gods again. And I tried. I attended this talk by a museum curator who talked about how the ancient Egyptians would encounter the gods in the course of their daily life. And as a veterinary technician, I thought, well, maybe I will see if I can connect to my gods through my work. And it was really hard because I was used to the kind of contact that requires an altered state of consciousness. And I don't know if you've ever tried, but it is really hard to maintain an altered state of consciousness when you are working with a kitten and trying to focus on a treatment plan. It does not work at all. So I did eventually figure it out, though, but it took me a while, so prepare for that. Let's see. Sources that I can give you for ritual would be from Richard Reedy's books. I've got Eternal Egypt and Everlasting Egypt. This is his first book, Eternal Egypt. It has 3 rituals, general rituals in it for Sekhmet, Sutek, and Jehuti. And it also has a morning ritual for Amun-Ra, which is rather long. It's the full-on ritual. These rituals are based on rituals that were recorded from temple practices. But the thing about temple ritual in ancient Egypt was that it required a staff of priests to do. And it wasn't the sort of thing where like there was a script and you follow from, you go right down the line and one person can read the whole thing. They had teams of priests, and the teams of priests would be doing different ceremonies in different places at the same time, and then they would all meet up together for some communal joint effort and then split up again in like this dance choreography of a ritual that one person simply can't do. And we are so few and so spread out that if you can find enough Kemetics in one place to actually try to do that, give me a call because I would like to come. But this book has temple ritual for Amun-Ra, the general rituals for Sekhmet, Jehuti, and Sutek. It's got the nighttime ritual of the mystical union of Ra with Osiris. It's got some transfiguration liturgies for the Blessed Dead. It's got the beautiful feast of the Western Valley. The beautiful feast of the Western Valley. I can speak. It's got some execration rituals in here, Book of Overthrowing Apep. It's got an apotheosis ritual where you identify each part of your body with a deity. And it's got the opening of the mouth ceremony for opening a statue. But again, please think very carefully before you do that. I also have this book, Everlasting Egypt. This is Richard's second book. It was published posthumously. He passed, and this book was mostly finished. But when he made the Eternal Egypt book, he had intended those 3 rituals to serve as templates for people to make their own rituals for the netjeru that they worshipped. But That does require access to epithets for your deity and hymns for your deity, and not everybody has access to that. And it's also just a very daunting task if you've never done it before. So many people were writing into him and asking him for help in writing rituals for their particular deity, that after a while, he just gathered them all up and was going to publish them in this book. And he's got rituals for a lot of deities in here. I helped to write the one for Bastet. And I wrote the hymns for the Bastet rituals because there are no surviving hymns for Bastet because she doesn't have any surviving temples, unfortunately. I'm trying to find the table of contents. There we go. So it's got the general rituals. It also has a brief ritual, which I feel would be really wonderful for anyone who is either beginning ritual, because some of these rituals can be lengthy, and or if you are an experienced Kemetic who would like to include ritual in your daily practice, or not daily, but in your regular practice. But maybe you're really busy and you don't have time for a 45-minute long ritual. There is a ritual in here for Wet Renpet, the New Year rite for Kemetics, which is one of our most important holidays. There is one for the brilliant festival of the lights of Nit, the reconciliation of the brother gods. That's the reconciliation of Heru, Horus, and Set. The mysteries of Osiris, some lunar rituals. Yeah, there's good stuff in there. I highly recommend that for a ritual source. So what Richard did was he studied those temple texts, and he found the core ceremonies, and he streamlined them in such a way that one person could do them all by themselves, were it necessary to do so. Or if you are lucky enough to have a group, you can break it up into as many different roles as you have people. And I went a little off my talk here. Okay. So some other ways of experiencing the netjeru, because ritual is not the only way to be Kemetic. And really the most important part of being Kemetic is that living in accordance with Ma'at. So other ways would be to commune with the divine through your daily activities. So maybe a person who wears makeup might use that time to commune with Hathor. If your trade has a patron, like maybe if you're an artisan, maybe Ptah. If you work with pottery, Knum would be a good one to look into. There's medical patrons, there's if you work in anything that has to do with legal matters or writing, Jehudi or Toth would be a good one. There are a lot of choices. So I talked a little bit about how I tried to relate to my gods through work. And what I eventually settled on was I let go of my expectations of this altered state of mind, altered state of consciousness. And what I eventually settled on was that my work brings me close to my gods, because it's like if you have a relationship with a very cherished, much loved person, and you did things with them which reminded you of what you loved about that person or your relationship with them, Like maybe it's your mother. Maybe they cared for you while you were sick. They made you soup. They sang you to sleep. They looked after you. They made you feel safe and comfortable. And then one day they're gone, and you know you'll never see them in the flesh again. But now you have a child or a loved one or a friend, and they get sick. And now you make the soup and you sing the song. You look after them, and when you do that, you feel their presence with you. It's like they're there with you again. And that's what it's like for me when I'm at work. When I am working with my patients and I'm tending to their needs, their comfort, when I'm fighting their illness on their behalf, I feel protective and loving towards them, like Bastet, that protective, motherly energy. When I am working with medicine, I feel the power of Sekhmet there. When I am making notations in medical records, I feel the precision of Jehudi. When I am trying to jerry-rig a medical setup to cater to a exotic body type that this machine really wasn't made to contend with, also Jehudi. If I perform a euthanasia, when I am caring for the body afterward, I feel very close to Anpu. And there are other things that you can do, like devotional activities, which is kind of like what I was talking before, only it's more intentional. Instead of finding the netjeru and the things that you do day to day, you choose the things that you do day to day based on the netjeru. So when I was trying to get to know Anpu, I adopted and cleaned up a graveyard. When I was getting to know Bastet, I volunteered at an animal shelter and I cared for the cats there and at my home. When I was getting to know Jehudi, I studied hieroglyphs and calligraphy. Sekhmet came much later. She just kind of clubbed me over the head and told me I was going to be serving her, so. Offerings are a very common part of Kemetic religion. There are lots of approaches. I personally prefer traditional types of offerings, and I give primarily consumable offerings. So good examples of that would be cool water, bread, flowers, incense, milk, beer, wine, honey, fruit, and various types of meat. And with the exception of certain types of meat, these are appropriate for any god or goddess. I sometimes offer non-consumables as well. Like if I have a medical textbook, I will offer that to Sekhmet. The most important offerings are bread and water. These were the only offerings that were brought into the inner sanctum and presented directly to the deity. When the offerings are presented, the god or goddess consumes the ka, the spiritual, energetic part of the offering. And then the physical part of that offering is reverted or returned back to the person who made that offering. And this is important and very different from a lot of pagan religions. Offerings that have been reverted are then eaten. It is very important to consume them. And non-consumable offerings, like those medical books I talked about, are to be used. And this is kind of a sacrament in Kemetic religion. Not reverting and not consuming or using these offerings is considered to be kind of wasteful and possibly disrespectful. The offerings don't need to be left on the altar for a long period of time. I find that the space of a brief ritual, meditation, or prayer session is plenty. But when the ka is consumed, the god or goddess leaves their blessing behind, or a small part of themselves, depending on who you are talking to. They leave that in this offering, which is then bodily taken in by the worshiper by consuming that offering. And it is a precious and sacred gift. So that is why we don't like to throw it away afterwards. My understanding of offerings developed over time. At first, I thought of it purely in physical terms. I wanted to share food and drink based on taste and what I thought the netjeru would enjoy. I also didn't understand the ancient concept of offerings. I thought they had like a room in the back of the temple somewhere, which just had like piles of gold and valuable oils and ritual tools and everything. And I thought that the netjeru deserved that wealth and luxury, and I was on a one-woman mission to restore it, which is why I ended up with the maximalist altar that I had. It had lots of beautiful things on it. So I bought jewelry, statues, semi-precious stones, weapons, gold, oils, and whatever else I could find and afford. Since I didn't have a use for most of it, it stacked up on my altar and gathered dust. When I finally moved, we had to move very short notice. We had like 4 days to get out of the apartment. I gave most of it away to the homeless. And I later found out that that is actually kind of in keeping with the ancient tradition of the temples. They would revert the offerings, and some of it would go to the priests to pay them for their services and support their family while they were working in the temple. And a lot of the priests who were working in the temple were part-timers, so they were serving 1 month out of every Kemetic season, so that's 3 months per year. The rest of the time they were just regular village. I always want to say village people, but then that makes me think of YMCA. But they were just regular village folk. And the rest of it was used to pay people for maintenance of the temple buildings, the repainting the statues and the reliefs that were there, buying the items that the temple needed to continue to function. And the temple was actually kind of the economic hub of the village. They would take in the wealth because everybody would tithe. They would donate some of their produce to the temple. So it would take in the combined wealth of the community, and then when they needed something, they would buy from you what they needed, and they would pay you in what you needed. So it was like a distribution system. It was really cool. They also had the first workers' comp system, by the way. If you got injured or sick and you could not work and support your family, you could go to the temple and the priest would treat you. And while you were being treated, they would send a portion of their offerings to your family to support your family while you were recovering. Because if you crashed and burned, then the community lost a worker. See, this is what I'm talking about with how mod is a community-oriented philosophy. The community supported itself. Anyway, I'm getting totally off on a tangent. Offerings. So yes, I didn't have a use for most of my offerings. I gave them away last time I moved. Then when I started learning about Heka, I started thinking about offerings in terms of their symbolism and energy. For example, water. Water is the element of life. It is cool, revitalizing, refreshing, purifying, and rejuvenating. And bread is the perfect symbol of the partnership between the gods and humankind. The netjeru give us seed, fertile earth, water, wind, and sunlight. Humans tend them, grow them, harvest them, and process them. And bread is the result, which has been a staple of human and divine nourishment for ages. And then right now, in my journey, I think of the offerings in terms of ma'at. The offerings establish and maintain a cycle of mutual giving between ourselves and the netjeru. And this is a healthy relationship in balance. The netjeru give to us, we give back to them. And it almost doesn't matter what the offering is. The gods live on ma'at. There'll be a part of the ritual later where the liturgy describes how the gods breathe ma'at, eat ma'at, and drink ma'at. And I think now that no matter what you're offering, the true offering is the ma'at that is generated by offering anything at all. So if you need to be discreet, though, and you can't offer physical things, maybe offer non-physical things. You could offer actions or activities that support ma'at, or which you think would resonate with your particular deity. You can further your religious studies, especially in regards to them. You can give voice offerings. This is a phenomenon that's popular in the veneration of the blessed dead, where we speak an offering and the words manifest that item, which is then offered to the spirit of the dead. And so one version would be, it starts out, an offering given by the king to Osiris, the Lord of Osiris, the great god, the Lord of Abydos. The offering is first addressed to the king of the land of the dead so that he can direct it to the intended person, that he may give an invocation offering of bread, beer, oxen, birds, alabaster, clothing, and every good and pure thing upon which a god lives. So he lists the things to be offered. For the ka of the revered Senwosret, through a voice, and that's when we indicate who it's for. And I feel that this formula could probably be altered for a netjeru offering. That's not traditional in ancient Egypt as far as I know, but I don't see why it wouldn't work, considering that the ancient Egyptians believed that the spirits of their justified dead were basically very minorly divinized humans. There is a bit of a controversy about consuming offerings for the blessed dead. I am of the opinion that you can consume them. The temples in ancient Egypt would generally present their offerings first to the main deity of their temple, then they would be reverted, and then they would offer them to secondary deities that were in the temple, then they would be reverted, and then they would be offered to any of the blessed dead who had managed to secure representation in the temple, usually through statues or stela. And that was a very popular thing to do because it guaranteed you free offerings every day. And then those would be reverted again, and then the priest would consume them. So they were eating Akhu offerings every day. And so they clearly didn't feel that it was disrespectful or dangerous. But there are some groups that don't consume Akhu offerings. Most of the people who don't either belong to an organization called Kemetic Orthodoxy, or they learned it from Kemetic Orthodoxy. But there's also some people who are just from cultures who have their own veneration systems for the blessed dead, and they don't consume offerings to the blessed dead, and so they continue this in their Kemetic practices.
So that's what we got for the talk. I wanted to emphasize the difference between the priestly rituals and the layperson rituals. So imagine for a moment a group of priests. They wake up in the morning and they start a procession in the front of the temple, and they process through what's called a hypostyle hall. And this hypostyle hall That's ash, by the way. This hypostyle hall is filled with columns that are made in the shape of papyrus or lotus blossoms. It's supposed to evoke a primeval swamp. And because that is how the ancient Egyptians perceived the world before the world was created, the primordial moon, the waters from which creation emerged. So they go walking through this primordial marsh hypostyle hall, and the path that they're taking, it gently slopes upward as they go through the temple. And this represents the rising of the Bed Mound, which is the first land that emerged from the waters of the Num as creation was taking place. Thank you, Ash. And then when they finally reach the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the god, they stop. Most of the offerings, well, all of the offerings are placed on a table that is just outside the inner sanctum. And the only offerings that are brought into place before the god are some bread and some water. They go, and then a few chosen priests go into this inner sanctum. And when they open the naos, that's like the sun rising on the first day. And this is a way of reenacting the creation of the world. And because the world was created in a perfect state of Ma'at, then as this world is recreated, this creation is reenacted, Ma'at is reestablished in the world. This is a kind of magic that is woven into ancient Egyptian ritual. So priestly ritual reestablishes Ma'at in the world, and it reaffirms the cycle of giving between the netjeru and the community by having the priests, on behalf of the community, presenting these offerings. And by doing that, they draw the netjer into a relationship with the community and a dwelling within the enlightened statue, which makes the netjer part of the community. So it's very community oriented. On the other hand, a layperson's ritual might be very different. They can vary quite a lot, actually, but you might see someone go to a niche in the wall in their home where they've got a statue or an altar in their home. They might light a candle. They might say some prayers. They might leave some offerings. We know that the people of the town would have been aware of some of the elements of temple ritual because most of the priests who were in the temple were of a lower rank of priests called the Wab priests, and these were priests who served in shifts called files, Pyles, and they served, as I said in the talk, for 1 month out of every Egyptian season. So 3 months out of the year, these people were serving as priests. And the other 9 months of the year, they were regular townsfolk, doing whatever it is, making pottery, making medicines, making crops, whatever it is that they normally did in their life. So they would have had those 3 months out of the year during which they were within the temple and exposed temple ritual. So they would know how this was carried out. And they may have taken elements of that ritual and brought it into their personal practice. And that's kind of the assumption that a lot of us go on. When we're doing a ritual for a layperson, we draw elements from temple ritual because it's really the only thing that we have that is written down. So we draw elements from the temple ritual and we kind of massage them into a form which is conducive to cultivating a relationship between the netjer and the worshiper. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about that. And meditation is often incorporated into modern Kemetic ritual. I know that the rituals that I was taught by Richard Beatty, and pretty much all of the rituals that I learned from the various temples that I trained in, had a space which was set aside, which could be used for meditation or prayer or heka. And this was for our benefit. It was probably not part of ancient Egyptian temple ritual. And the ancient Egyptians grew up in a society which was very aware of the presence of the netjeru all around them all the time. We are not quite so aware, so we need a little bit more help. We actually have a tendency in the modern day to shut down a lot of our senses just to avoid the overwhelm of the sensory stimulus that we are bombarded with every day. So when I started my practice, my teachers taught me, and meditation is not a natural skill for me. I am very practical minded and I have a really hard time with the mystical side of things sometimes. So they taught me to relax and just open myself to the presence of the netjer or the netjeret that I was working with, and to pay attention to all of my senses and all of my body, and to allow the netjeru to try to communicate with me through the use of those senses. And the netjeru, this communication is not necessarily a booming voice from the heavens. In fact, it's pretty much never going to be that. And it's different for everyone. I believe that netjeru play to our personal strengths, which are different for everyone. And they play to our natural talents and incorporate those. So if you are particularly sensitive to scents, maybe they would incorporate your sense of smell somehow. If you are particularly sensitive to, if you have a skill for clairvoyance, maybe they might send you visions. Or maybe it's that you are really not sensitive in an area. For me, I know my sense of smell is not there. It's very weak, which it makes it very clear to me when I'm offering something and all of a sudden I get a strong rush of scent, and I know and I can smell the offerings very well. I know that something special is happening, and that's how I know that the offerings are being received. But that doesn't work for everybody. It just works for me because my sense of smell is so weak. So that's just an example. This personal language between you and the netjeru, it can take a long time to build. And it's very tempting to think that, oh, well, this is all in my head. I'm just making this up. Trust me, we all go through that. And you just have to be willing to suspend disbelief to an extent. You need to be critical of what messages are coming in, and if they are something that would be harmful to you or to someone else, then reject those messages. But if it's not something that would be harmful, then what do you have to lose? Give it a chance. You have to open the door a little bit for the netjeru to be able to establish communication with you. And when you first start, that communication is going to be very weak. And that communication is not going to be consistent. There are going to be times, long periods of times, when they go completely silent and you're not going to hear anything from them. I usually take that as a good sign, actually. If I'm not hearing from them, that means that there's nothing that they need to correct me on, that I'm on the right path. You would not know from listening to what people say in the community that this is the case. You would think, from what you hear in the community, that everybody is hearing from the netjeru all the time. And that is just because we tend to bias our talk towards what's most interesting, which is the time that I felt Sekhmet's heat when I was meditating on her. That's far more interesting than the hundreds of times when I was meditating on Sekhmet and I felt nothing at all. So I will talk about that period of time when I had a vision or when I received a communication. I'm going to talk about that. And all the people, all the other people on the internet are doing the same thing. So you get all of these people, and they're all talking about all these amazing experiences that they're having, and we're talking about them because they are amazing. It's not every day that you get these kinds of experiences, but it looks like that's what's happening because there are so many people who are chiming in with these amazing experiences, and they're only talking about the amazing experiences, and it might lead you to feel like your connection is lacking in some way, and it is not. It is totally normal to not hear anything, to not feel anything, especially when you're first getting started. It took me years to get any kind of communication at all with the gods. And some people are more skilled at these sorts of things, and some people are not. It's everybody goes at their own pace, and don't compare yourself to other people. I really cannot stress that enough. But I think that is pretty much all that I really wanted to go over. I hope that the talk was interesting for you. I still have another video that's going to be coming out. The next one's going to be on Heka and the Akhu. And tell me a little bit about your practices. What kinds of devotional activities do you do with your gods? Do you do ritual? I know I used to do ritual very, very frequently because I was in training to be a priest for a while, and I did it daily because that's what you do when you are in training to be a priest. But it turned out that was not the path for me, and I left the priesthood training program, and now I mostly do ritual on special occasions, and I bond with the netjeru more through my daily life than ritual. And that's totally fine. That's okay. You don't have to do ritual unless you're a priest. But if you want to do ritual, go right ahead. It can be very nice. Just don't be discouraged if you're not having earth-shattering events every night. Okay, anyway, I'm going to stop for now. I will see you in the next video. And take care. Bye.